The first time Gloria Pike kicked my trash bin, I thought she had slipped. The second time, I realized she had done it on purpose. By the 8th week, she had no idea that the gray plastic bin she hated was bolted to nearly 100 pounds of steel and concrete, and 4 cameras were waiting for her to take one more swing. My name is Mason Reed. I was 46 at the time, and I had spent most of my adult life building foundations around Franklin County, Indiana. The kind of work where one bad measurement can crack a house 10 years after you've forgotten the address. Concrete teaches you patience, mostly because it does not care how angry you are, how late you are, or how loudly somebody insists they know better. You prepare the ground, set the forms, check every line twice, and then you wait. That habit probably saved me, because Gloria Pike was the kind of woman who survived by making people react before they had time to think. I lived in a planned community called Maple Hollow, a neighborhood of brick ranch houses, trimmed hedges, matching mailboxes, and enough lawn fertilizer to make the grass look painted. I had moved there 3 years earlier with my 10-year-old son, Caleb, and my mother, Evelyn, who was 79 and living with early-stage dementia. She still knew who I was most mornings, but time had started folding in on itself for her. Some days she thought I was my older brother. Some days she packed a lunch for my father, who had been dead for 11 years. What she needed most was routine. Quiet breakfasts, the same blue mug, the same chair beside the front window. Sudden noises could shake her for hours, which is why the sound of that trash bin hitting the pavement mattered more than Gloria ever understood. Trash pickup was every Friday morning, so Thursday evening I rolled the bin to the curb beside the young oak near our driveway. Every house on Cedar Finch Lane did the same thing. The first Friday, I woke to the crash of plastic against asphalt, followed by the scrape of bottles and cans spilling into the gutter. I looked outside and saw garbage spread across the grass. My mother stood behind me in her robe, gripping the curtain with both hands. She whispered, "Are they coming inside, Mason?" I told her no, helped her back to the kitchen, warmed her coffee, and sat with her until she stopped trembling. I assumed a raccoon had tipped the bin, though it would have been the first raccoon I had ever seen wearing white loafers. The next week, I was already at the window when Gloria came walking down the sidewalk. She was president of the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association and had held the position for nearly a decade. She drove a pearl-white SUV, wore expensive sunglasses even when the sky was cloudy, and spoke with the slow confidence of someone who believed every conversation ended with her winning. She stopped beside my bin, looked directly at my house, and pressed the sole of her shoe against it until it toppled. Then she continued walking without breaking stride. 2 days later, I received an HOA violation notice for improper refuse placement and visible debris. $50 due within 10 days. I read that notice 3 times because my brain kept trying to turn it into something reasonable. It never did. On the 3rd week, I waited for her near the curb. "Morning, Gloria," I said, keeping my voice friendly. "I think there has been some confusion about my trash bin." She gave me a tight smile. "There is no confusion, Mr. Reed. That container is an eyesore. It needs to remain behind your garage. The collection truck only picks up at the curb," I said. "Every other house puts theirs out here. Other homes follow standards." She replied, "Yours announces itself." I almost laughed because it was a trash bin, not a marching band. Instead, I asked her to show me the rule. That changed her expression. "People like Gloria love rules until you ask where they are written." She tapped the bin with the toe of her shoe and said, "I am the board president. I know what the standards are." Then she pushed it over again, right in front of me, and a coffee filter landed near her foot. She stepped around it and walked away. Across the street, my neighbor Leonard pretended to adjust his sprinkler. 2 houses down, Ruth Bell stood frozen beside her mailbox. Nobody said anything, and that silence told me more than Gloria had. They were afraid of her, not terrified in the dramatic sense, but tired, afraid. The kind of fear built from years of small fines, nasty letters, and threats that were just expensive enough to make resistance feel foolish. That afternoon, I bought a weatherproof security camera and mounted it beneath the porch roof. The following Friday, Gloria gave me exactly what I expected. She approached the bin, glanced toward the house, kicked it hard enough to scatter trash across the lawn, then took out her phone and photographed the mess. That was the moment the whole thing changed for me. She was not losing her temper. She was manufacturing evidence. She created the violation, documented it, and then mailed me a bill. The second notice arrived on Monday, $100 this time, with a warning that continued non-compliance could result in removal of the container at my expense. Caleb watched me read it over breakfast. "Dad," he said, "your jaw is doing that thing." "What thing?" "The angry square thing." I loosened my face and told him it was just neighborhood nonsense, but I felt something settle inside me. Not rage exactly, more like the moment you find a crack in a footing and realize the problem runs deeper than the surface. I started a folder. Every notice went inside, dated and scanned. Every video was backed up twice. I wrote down what Gloria said. When she said it, who was nearby, even the weather. My crew laughed when I told them, "You building a case against a garbage can?" "Mason." "No," I said. "I think I am building one against the person kicking it." The next 2 Fridays, Gloria repeated the same performance. Each crash set my mother into a panic. One morning, she stood in the hallway asking whether we needed to hide. Another time, she picked up a kitchen knife because she thought someone was trying to break into the house. I took it gently from her hand and held her until she cried, and that was when the argument stopped being petty in my mind. Gloria had chosen my home because she believed I would pay, apologize, and disappear into the quiet like everybody else. She had mistaken restraint for surrender. On the 6th Friday, she arrived with a man wearing a navy polo, a plastic badge holder, and a clipboard. "This is Warren from Community Enforcement," she announced loudly enough for half the street to hear. I walked down the driveway and asked, "Which department, city or county?" Warren opened his mouth, but Gloria answered for him. "He works for the association." So he was not an inspector, not an officer, not even an employee of the city, just a nervous man holding a clipboard like it was a shield. My bin was upright and clean. Gloria pointed at it. "Visible from the road," she said. "Document it." I looked at Warren. "The garbage truck needs to see the bin," I said. "That is generally how garbage collection works." Leonard snorted across the street. Ruth covered a smile. Gloria heard them, and humiliation moved across her face like heat under paint. She stepped forward and kicked the bin over in front of everyone. "There," she snapped. "Now it is a violation. Write it down." Warren stared at the trash rolling into the gutter and would not look at me. Gloria turned toward the neighbors and said, "I decide what matters in this community." I wrote that sentence down word for word that night, because people who believe they are untouchable eventually say the truth out loud. After she left, Ruth crossed the street carrying a stack of old violation letters. She told me Gloria had fined her $250 for hanging copper wind chimes on her porch. Leonard had paid $400 for leaving his garage door open during a yard sale. Neither of them had fought back. They'd assumed they were alone. I looked at the papers in Ruth's hands, then at the fresh notice tucked under mine, and I knew the trash bin was only the doorway. Whatever Gloria Pike had built in Maple Hollow was bigger than one ridiculous rule, and if I wanted to bring it down, I needed to stop looking at the woman and start looking at the structure holding her up. The first place I went was not the HOA office, because Gloria controlled that room, the filing cabinet, and probably the temperature on the thermostat, too. So I drove to the Franklin County Recorder during my lunch break and asked for the document she could not rewrite, the recorded plat for Maple Hollow and the original covenanters filed when the development was built. The clerk was a woman named Denise, mid-60s, silver hair cut short, reading glasses hanging from a bright red chain, and when I told her I was fighting an HOA fine over a trash bin, she looked at me for a long second and said, "Let me guess. Somebody invented a rule and hoped you would never check." That was exactly what had happened. I sat beneath a humming fluorescent light and read every page of the covenants. 43 pages of restrictions covering fences, sheds, exterior paint, satellite dishes, even the maximum height of decorative birdhouses. But there was nothing about trash bins being visible from the street, nothing requiring them to remain behind a garage, and nothing giving Gloria permission to create new rules by announcing them on a sidewalk. Then Denise unfolded the plat map across the counter, and there it was, clean and plain as a chalk line. My property ended at the inner edge of the sidewalk, while the grassy strip beside the curb belonged to the public right-of-way. The exact spot where Gloria had been kicking my bin was not controlled by Maple Hollow at all. It was maintained by homeowners, but legally governed by the township. I pulled the township sanitation ordinance next, and that one made me laugh out loud. because he required residents to place containers at the curb before 6:30 on collection morning. Gloria had been punishing me for obeying the law on land where she had no authority, using a restriction that did not exist. Denise made me 3 certified copies and slid them across the counter. People like her count on everybody being too busy to read, she said. Be less busy. I liked her immediately. Before leaving, I asked where HOA fines were supposed to appear in the financial records. Denise told me members had the right to request annual statements, contractor payments, and meeting minutes, so that afternoon I sent a certified demand to the board, copied every director, and gave them 10 business days to respond. Gloria answered in 2. Her letter accused me of harassing volunteer leadership and warned that any further disruptive behavior could result in legal action. I added it to the folder. Angry people think a threat closes a conversation, but in writing, a threat becomes evidence. And Gloria was generous with evidence. The financial packet arrived 9 days later, incomplete, badly copied, and smelling faintly of cigarette smoke. I spread it across the dining table after Caleb went to bed and my mother settled into her room. There were thousands of dollars in yearly violation revenue, far more than I expected, followed by repeated payments to a company called Pike Community Solutions. The description beside each payment was vague. Neighborhood compliance, beautification support, administrative services, the kind of language designed to sound official while saying absolutely nothing. I searched the Indiana Business Registry and found the registered owner in less than a minute, Douglas Pike, Gloria's husband and the HOA treasurer. That was the point where the whole shape of it came into focus. Gloria was not protecting community standards. She was generating invoices. Every tipped bin, every wind chime, every open garage door was a little machine that moved money from a frightened neighbor into her husband's company. The violations were not the result of her obsession with order. They were the product. I sat there staring at the filing while the refrigerator clicked on behind me, and I felt something colder than anger. Anger burns fast, certainty stays. The next evening, I showed Ruth and Leonard what I had found. Ruth read Douglas's name twice, then lowered herself into a kitchen chair. She has been stealing from us, she whispered. Leonard did not say anything for almost a minute, then walked home and returned with a banker box full of notices collected over 7 years. By Sunday, word had moved quietly through Cedar Finch Lane. I met a widower named Frank Daly who had paid $600 because his porch light was supposedly too bright. A young couple fined for leaving a stroller beside their front door. And Mrs. Givens, an 82-year-old retired school librarian who had been charged $920 over 3 years for weeds, faded shutters, and a flag mounted at the wrong angle. She kept every notice in plastic sleeves, organized by date, because librarians do not throw away paper and tyrants should fear librarians. She served me lemon cookies while I photographed the documents. I paid because I did not want them putting a lien on the house my husband built, she said. Her hand shook when she said lien, and I understood exactly how Gloria had maintained control for so long. She did not need to win in court. She only needed people to fear the possibility of court more than losing a few $100s. She had built a business on exhaustion, so I started doing the one thing she had never expected. I introduced her victims to one another. Every Wednesday evening, 5 or 6 neighbors gathered in Leonard's garage around a folding table. We compared notices, highlighted invented rules, matched payment dates to transfers in the financial statements, and built a timeline. Caleb called it the Trash Can Detective Club. My mother sometimes wandered in carrying her blue mug and asked whether we were planning a birthday party. I always told her yes, in a way we were. We were planning the day Gloria's reign would end. The annual HOA meeting was 4 weeks away, and under the bylaws, any group representing 20% of the homes could force a financial review and request a removal vote. We had 34% before the second meeting in Leonard's garage. I sent another certified letter demanding that the audit and board conduct be placed on the agenda. I also contacted a reporter named Elise Navarro at the county paper, who had been investigating complaints involving private homeowner associations. She listened without interrupting while I described the fake rule, the videos, the public right-of-way, and Pike Community Solutions. When I finished, she said, "Please tell me you did not confront them about the company yet." I said I had not. "Good," she replied. "People hide records when they know someone is looking. Let them think you are still angry about the bin." That suited me fine, because by then I had begun preparing a different surprise. Gloria liked kicking my trash bin because it was easy. A light plastic object that fell on command and made a loud, humiliating crash. She enjoyed the performance, so I decided not to take the stage away from her. I just changed the physics. On a Saturday morning, I removed a narrow section of sod beside the curb and dug below the frost line. Then set a compact reinforced concrete footing with a galvanized anchor bracket hidden beneath a gray steel cradle. The work was neat, permitted as a removable container support within the maintained right-of-way, and nearly invisible once I patched the surface. The footing and steel weighed a little over 95 pounds, not counting the earth holding it in place. Caleb sat on an overturned bucket drinking lemonade and asked whether we were building a bunker for garbage. Something like that, I told him. For raccoons. Big raccoons, I said. I installed 3 more cameras that afternoon. 1 beneath the garage light, 1 inside the front window, and 1 low behind the hedge, all with timestamps and automatic cloud backup. Then I tested the bin with a hard kick of my own. It did not move. My ankle hurt for the rest of the day, which I considered successful quality control. The following Friday, Gloria came down the sidewalk at 7:12 in the morning, wearing cream trousers and carrying the confidence of a woman who had never met a consequence she could not bill to somebody else. I watched from the kitchen with my coffee in one hand while my mother buttered toast behind me. Gloria glanced at the porch, drew back her right foot, and drove it into the side of the bin with everything she had. The sound was not the hollow crash she expected. It was a deep metallic thud followed by a sharp yelp. The bin stayed perfectly upright. Gloria spun halfway around, grabbed her ankle, and hopped twice before landing against the oak tree. Coffee almost came out of my nose. She looked up at the house, face twisted with pain and disbelief, then kicked it again with her other foot, softer this time, as if the first result had offended her personally. Nothing moved. She crouched, pulled at the handle, shoved the lid, and finally walked away limping, looking back every few steps like the bin had betrayed a private agreement. I saved the footage, labeled it Friday, 8, and went to work. The next week, she returned with a pry bar. It was just after dusk, and she looked both ways before sliding the metal beneath the cradle. She pulled until her sunglasses fell into the grass, muttered something the microphone caught clearly, and strained so hard the porch camera recorded the veins in her neck. The bin did not shift an inch. Then came the tow truck. Gloria stood beside it the morning before the annual meeting, pointing at my curb like a general ordering artillery. The driver wrapped a strap around the bin and started the winch. I walked outside and told him the container belonged to me. The anchor was lawfully installed, and every second was being recorded from 4 angles. Then I nodded toward Gloria. She is not code enforcement, I said. She is a private citizen asking you to damage property she does not own. The driver looked at the cameras, looked at Gloria, and unhooked the strap. As he climbed into the cab, Gloria stepped close enough that I could smell her perfume. You think this little stunt makes you powerful, she hissed. Tomorrow night, I will have you censured, fined, and removed from this community if I have to. I held her gaze and smiled. Bring the financial records, Gloria. For the first time since this started, she did not have an answer, but she still believed the meeting belonged to her, and that was the final mistake I needed her to make. The clubhouse was packed the next night. More people than I had ever seen at an HOA meeting. Folding chairs lined beneath fluorescent lights, burnt coffee bubbling in a metal urn near the wall, neighbors whispering in little clusters like they were waiting for a storm to break. Gloria sat at the front table in a pale blue blazer with Douglas beside her, both of them wearing the calm expressions of people who still believed the room belonged to them. Elise Navarro sat in the back row with a notebook on her knee, and near the door was a quiet man named Samuel Hodge from the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit. Though Gloria did not know that yet, my mother stayed home with Caleb and a family friend, which mattered to me more than I expected, because for once I could walk into a fight without worrying that some sudden noise would frighten her. Gloria tapped the microphone and opened the meeting with a speech about preserving values, respecting leadership, and dealing with disruptive residents. She never looked directly at me until the end. Then she smiled. Before we moved to new business, she said, the board will address repeated violations by Mr. Profelations, Mason Reed, including unauthorized construction in the public view, harassment of board officers, and conduct that threatens the harmony of Maple Hollow. Douglas already had his pen moving, writing the version of events they planned to make official. Gloria proposed a formal censure and additional fines totaling $2,000. A few months earlier, that number might have tightened my chest. That night, it sounded like somebody knocking on a door that had already been removed. I stood and said, "Point of order." Gloria sighed as if I were a child interrupting dinner. "You will have an opportunity to speak after the board votes. According to Article 8, Section 3 of the Recorded Bylaws," I said, "any member may demand review of association finances during the annual meeting, provided written notice was delivered at least 10 business days in advance." I held up the certified receipt. "Mine was delivered 26 days ago." The whispering stopped. Gloria leaned toward Douglas, and for the first time his pen quit moving. She said the request had been reviewed and found burdensome. I said, "The bylaws do not contain a burden exception." Ruth stood behind me. "I want the records reviewed too." Leonard rose next, then Mrs. Givens, slow but steady, with one hand on the chair in front of her. Within seconds, half the room was standing. Gloria's face tightened. "This is not how meetings are conducted. It is how this one is going to be conducted," Mrs. Givens said, and I swear the whole room seemed to straighten when that 82-year-old librarian spoke. I walked to the front carrying 3 folders. I did not shout, because shouting would have made it look like a personal feud, and this had stopped being personal weeks ago. I laid the certified plat on the table and explained that the curb strip where my bin had been placed was public right-of-way, outside HOA control. Then I read the sanitation ordinance requiring containers at the curb. Finally, I opened the covenanters and asked Gloria to identify the rule she had cited 8 times. She did not touch the document. "Community standards are not limited to specific wording," she said. "Actually, they are," I replied. "When you are taking people's money and threatening their homes." A murmur moved through the room. I showed the video of her kicking the bin, then photographing the trash, then submitting the violation. The first clip played in silence. By the third, people were shaking their heads. By the footage of her fighting the anchored bin with a pry bar, somebody near the back laughed. Then several others did. Not because the situation was funny anymore, but because fear had finally lost its grip. Gloria stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. This footage was obtained through harassment and entrapment. I looked at her. "Gloria, I put a trash bin in my curb. You brought the pry bar." Then I opened the second folder. "Pike Community Solutions," I said, "received more than $58,000 from HOA funds over 4 years. The company is owned by Douglas Pike, our treasurer, and your husband. There are no competitive bids, no detailed invoices, and no documented services matching the amounts paid." Douglas went pale. Gloria called it a legitimate administrative vendor. Leonard held up 7 years of violation letters and asked why his fines had funded the board president's family business. Mrs. Givens raised her plastic sleeves and asked the same thing. That was when Samuel Hodge stood near the door, buttoned his jacket, and introduced himself. He said the prosecutor's office had received a complaint supported by financial records and would be requesting immediate access to the association's accounts, contracts, and electronic files. Gloria stared at me like I had dragged him out of the wall. "You did this," she whispered. "No," I said. "You did it every time you invented a violation and assumed nobody would compare notes." The room voted that night to suspend Gloria and Douglas pending an independent audit. The vote was not close. 3 weeks later, investigators confirmed that Pike Community Solutions had billed Maple Hollow for inspections that never happened, landscaping work performed by ordinary HOA volunteers, and administrative services Douglas could not explain. The total passed $62,000. Gloria was charged with theft, falsifying business records, and retaliation connected to several fraudulent liens. Douglas cooperated, accepted a plea agreement, and testified that the fine system had been Gloria's idea, though I never believed he needed much convincing. They resigned before the criminal case was finished and sold their white SUV that winter. Ruth became interim president, mostly because nobody else could organize a room like a woman who had spent 30 years teaching middle school. The new board hired an outside auditor, canceled every unsupported fine, and returned money wherever records allowed. Mrs. Givens received $920. When I delivered the check, she placed it beside her husband's photograph and said, "He would have hated that I was scared." I told her courage is not the absence of fear. It is finally deciding the fear has cost enough. We used part of the recovered money to create a neighborhood assistance fund for elderly residents and families facing emergency repairs. Leonard fixed Mrs. Gibbons's Porsche rail. Ruth organized volunteers to repaint Frank Daly's shutters, and I built a wheelchair ramp for a retired nurse on Willow Trace. By September, Maple Hollow felt like a different place. Not because the lawns were greener or the mailboxes matched better, but because people had started talking to one another. At the block party, my mother sat under an oak tree while Caleb chased other kids through the sprinklers. She did not remember Gloria, the trash, or the weeks of fear. She looked around at the grills, folding tables, and neighbors laughing together, then squeezed my hand. "This is a good place," she said. I told her it finally was. My trash bin still sits at the curb every Friday, anchored to that hidden footing, though nobody has tried to kick it since. Some people think I should remove the concrete now that the danger is gone. Others say it should stay there as a monument to consequences. I have never decided which side is right. Maybe leaving it is petty, or maybe some lessons deserve a foundation. Tell me what you think. Was I justified in setting the trap and exposing Gloria, or did I cross a line by letting her hurt herself on something I knew she would kick? Leave your verdict in the comments. Share this story with anyone who has ever been bullied by a clipboard. And subscribe if you believe patience, preparation, and a paper trail can beat arrogance every single time.